Let's talk about chapter 26 on JSON and chapter 27 on fetch. First, let's talk about JSON, which is data that is all packaged up and ready to go. I will talk a little bit about what an API is, and then we'll talk about the JSON itself. So what is an API? It stands for Application Programming Interface, and it's the idea that you have two different systems that need to send and receive data between themselves, and they might be completely different in technology and not have the same frameworks or languages or anything, but you can package up the data in a way that they can interact through an API. Most APIs will have some form of documentation, which can be really helpful. And for public APIs, if you're out there looking for ones that are free to use, I can say that the quality and the quantity of the information on the documentation can vary quite a bit. So you never quite know what you're going to get, but well-written API docs will usually give you all or most of the following. All of the possible endpoints, those are the URLs that you reach out to make your request. Any of the headers that might be required if you have to provide them with some information as part of your request. And any available query parameters so that you could maybe filter something or be more specific about what it is that you're looking for. And if it requires an authentication key, it should have instructions for how you can obtain one. Also, some APIs make their data available in multiple formats. So it'll tell you if it's just going to be text or if it'll come in JSON or XML or something like that. So I can show you some examples here of documentation. This one's called advice slip, where you can just go and get some random advice, or you can search for advice or get it by an ID number. They have different ways that you can actually request this. So they give you in the documentation here information about the HTTP methods you're using, what that endpoint is, the URL. So this one's just api.adviceslip.com/advice. That would be where you would make the request to. And then it tells you, how the object's going to come back, the information, how it's going to be structured. And they'll let you know if there's any parameters that you can use for anything. And down here, they give you other examples of how the message would actually look when you have the response come back. And they give you a little bit of an example like this of examples for different types of results that you could get. So that's pretty useful. It gives you an idea of what to expect, right? We're going to be using a couple of APIs today. The dog API is one where we can fetch random photos of dog pictures. They have documentation, and we'll tell you a little bit more about, same thing, kind of what's the endpoint you can reach out to, what is it going to look like, the data when you receive it. And they have one where you can get a list of all the breeds in their system, one where you can actually get random images from their collections and multiple random images. So different ways to do things. The cat API is a whole thing. They require you get an API key. So that's something that you can, go here and make a request. But then they also have guides here. And they will tell you a little bit about, exactly how to use the API, what some of the query parameters are, so you could be more specific on the breed or the category or things like that, and what you would need to do to get more than one image, an example of a request URL or an endpoint, and then an example response. So lots of different things out there to play around with, and we'll see what that looks like to actually fetch data from it. So when the data arrives, it's in this format often called JSON, JavaScript Object Notation, very popular. And you can receive a single object, like JSON object, or you can get an array of multiple JSON objects. Either way, it's going to look really similar to JavaScript, but it does have some differences. First of all of the keys have to be in double quotes. So not only do they have to be in quotes, they have to be double quotes. So remember that. Also, all string values have to be in double quotes, which is pretty similar to JavaScript, but again, not single quotes, has to be double quotes. If you have other data types like numbers or Booleans, that's normal. you would just see a number, you see a Boolean. If you have an array or another nested object, that's all going to look pretty normal. So that's the way that it works, and you can access everything with key value pairs using dot notation and things like that, just like you normally would. So now that we know that there's these APIs out there that you can fetch data from, and it's probably going to come in a format that looks like this, how do you go about fetching it, right? So let's take a look at this concept of fetching data from an API. I'm going to talk about a couple of concepts first that are important for being able to handle this process. The first is asynchronicity, and the second is promises. So once we kind of understand those concepts, then we can actually look at what it is to fetch data with JavaScript and look at some of the traditional syntax and also some of the more modern syntax. I want to teach both of them to you. And then we will practice, what does it look like to actually use the JSON once you receive it? What can you do with it? So asynchronicity is this concept that two different things can operate on their own timelines and one has nothing to do with the other. Network requests are this way. There's a lot of things that are out of your control and you don't know how long it's going to take to get your data back. So it could be the speed of the network or the location, literally how far away it is and how many things it has to travel through to get to you. The size of the data. If there's a lot of data, it's going to take longer, right? But while you're waiting for that, the rest of your code keeps executing at lightning speed, right? So you might have this process that looks something a little bit like this. You've got some code and then you go to fetch some data from some server somewhere. So you make this request out to this API and you got some more code and then some more code. And it's like, okay, when is it coming back, right? Does it come back here? Does it come back here? Is it going to come back here? And you just don't know. And this can be a problem because if you need your data to show up before your code can move on, it's out of your control. You have no idea when it's going to come back. Because of asynchronicity, they had to develop a way for JavaScript to be able to wait for something to arrive and then only move forward after the data has in fact actually arrived. So that leads us to this concept of promises. This is the expectation of a response. You fetch a data from an API, and when you do that, you actually have two promises. You have one that's the response from your initial request, the fact that you even made a request and you ultimately expect to receive some sort of response. But then wrapped up inside of that is also the data itself because it's been packaged up and then you have to unpackage it. So there's a promise within a promise. So you can kind of think of this whole real life scenario where you place an order online from home, right? And they get your order and they kind of, check out, okay, this is the order we need to fulfill. So they go to the warehouse and they look for all the items that are needed and then they box it all up and then they mail it back to you. So you wait for that whole thing to happen. You're not sure exactly how long it's going to take, but then it comes. And when it arrives, you can unpackage it. You receive it first and then you unpackage it and remove the contents. So this is how it's going to work. We are going to make a request for some data. And the API is going to say, okay, hang on, be right back. And it's going to go and look for it. And then it's going to package it up. And then when we receive it, we can say, okay, great, we've got it now, finally. But then you have to unpack it and actually do something with it. So those two steps are going to be critical. And then it's like, once both of those things are done, then our code can move on. So what this looks like in practice, to actually control the timing, it basically means you get to specify the code that executes after that operation completes. So there's a function called fetch, and you give it an endpoint, a URL, and that's how you make the request of the API. If you have to include some headers and things like that, you can include that at the same time. We'll look at some options with that in a minute. But in a broader sense, you're just making that request, right? So you receive the response back, you unpackage the data, and there's two different syntaxes for this. The traditional syntax uses this promise class method called then, .then, and you have to use it twice since there's two promises. But the modern syntax uses two keywords, async and await, and they're used in conjunction with one another. So what I would like to do is to show you how to do this with two different ways. At first, we'll talk about traditional, and then I'll show you what modern looks like. So for traditional, the question is when, not now, then. So you're going to use this then method. So you use fetch like normal, you give it an endpoint, and then use .then to declare some sort of function, and it's generally an anonymous function you just put right there in place, and say, this is the code that I need to run once that very first promise has been fulfilled. And then you say, okay, now I want to use the JSON method to actually extract the data once it arrives. And you use then a second time to say, this is what should happen after the data has been unpackaged. So both of those steps are necessary. Waiting for it to arrive and then executing some code, and then waiting until you unpackage it and then executing some code, because both of those things take time. So with this syntax, the very first thing you do is to call that fetch function. Then you pass in an endpoint. So it's a URL that is exactly where that request needs to go according to the API documentation. And then this is the important part. You control the timing of how your code executes with .then and capture the response object when it arrives in your anonymous function. So you can set up this anonymous function and then just provide whatever variable you want here that represents the response. It can be response, it can be something else, but that's what it represents, is the overall response from your original request. So once you have that, you can use that to then call the JSON method on that response object to extract the data. When that process is complete, you're controlling your timing again with another .then. And then the function you provide to that one allows you to capture the data. So you provide some sort of variable here, and this time I'm calling it data. And then you can do something with it, and that just gets done here inside the function. So let's take a look at what this, how this would work. I have a little page that I want to do a little app with where we can fetch some of those dog pictures, right? So let me get this up and running. I can see that in the index, I just have some stuff in my head with fonts and whatnot. And I've linked over to my style sheet, linked to my script. And then I just have a header in my section. I have a couple of buttons and an instruction that just says to click one of these buttons to get a random photo. And then this results section down here that is currently empty, but of course we're going to put something in it. And then I've just got some information down here, some links back to those public APIs so that you can see exactly where those were coming from. So let's get this actually up in the browser. I'm going to open it with Live Server so we can see this. And let me just go ahead and put it in the same window here. Okay, and I'm going to open up this so we can see what's going on in the console first, and we're also going to make use of the network tab so we can see these requests being made. So right now I have the page, it's set up, I've got the buttons in place, but if I click on them, nothing happens. I don't have any JavaScript handling, like listening for the click event and, running any code when that happens. That's what we need to do. So over here in my script, I'm going to start by saying, I've got this result here. I've already established an object that represents that result section in the page. So this is just going to be where we put it. We're just going to put, the inner HTML of this section, and we'll assign it once we have that data back. So we just have to go get it. So I also want to talk about this concept real quick of event delegation. It's something that I haven't talked about yet in terms of event listeners. But there's this concept called delegation where you actually put the listener on the document itself, and you just listen for a click anywhere in the document. And then you use the event that you can capture here whenever an event fires, and you can use event.target and then look at the ID of that target. So this is going to represent whatever the object is, whatever the element is on the page, without you actually having to create specific objects for it. It just says, if that's the thing that was clicked on, let's go check the ID of it. If the ID matches, then we can do something with it. And so this way I have multiple targets that could potentially be what I want it to do. It could either be the dog button or the cat button. I handle it with a single listener. This is the idea of event delegation. So in this case, event.target.id being the dog button means that here is where we'd want to fetch the data for dogs, right? So we'll use the traditional syntax. And I will say fetch, and then I will provide the correct endpoint for this. Now we need to go to the API documentation and find out what is the correct endpoint for a random photo. So I'll come over here and take a look at this. And right here, it gives me this URL, dog.ceo/API/breeds/image/random. Lots of paths there, but that's going to be exactly what we need. And we can expect that it's going to come back looking something like this, where the message is going to be the URL of the photo itself. Okay, so I'll put this in here in quotes. And then I'll say .then and provide the function that should execute once that response is received. And I'll capture the response like this. Okay. And then inside the body of this function, I'll make use of that response and say when the JSON arrives, let's unpackage it and then run this function where I can actually capture the data that's been unpacked. And the very first thing you always do when you do a fetch is just log it. Let's just see what this data looks like when it arrives. So I'll come back over here to our page and click the dog button. And boom, we have some JSON. So let's take a look at it. So it's an object that has two keys, message and status, which is just what it looked like here, right? It's consistent with what the documentation had. The message has the URL of the dog. It says it's a terrier fox and gives us a JPEG there. So let's say, okay, now we know what to do with our data, and we just need to, tap into that message key to get the URL, right? Let's go ahead and update the page by going to the result. And remember, this is the object that represents that result section down here in the page right now that's currently empty. And we'll say, let's set the inner HTML. And I'm going to use a template literal here to just create my HTML that should go between those tags. So I'll go to data.message, and that's going to give me the source for that photo. We just verified here that the message key is the one that holds that. So data.message, since data is what I decided to call this. And then finish that with a width of 300 pixels. So we're going to make sure we control what size it is on the page when we load it in. And then that image should be added to the page. And we can watch this happening if we come over here to the result section right there. Currently it's empty, right? Let's watch what happens when I click on this. All right, now you see that it can be expanded, and there's the image right there. And we see it show up on the page. And he's super cute, right? So we can keep doing that, and every time we click, you can see it updates with a new image. All right, so we've got our dog picture fetching going wonderfully. That's all we needed to do. So this syntax can look a little confusing. You just have to think about it logically. First you make the request, and then once it's received, you can say, okay, I've got some code to execute. Let's receive that response. And then I just need to unbox it. So I'll say response.json, and then again say, when you're done unboxing, give me that data, and here's what I want you to do with it. And you have some code to execute here. Okay. That's the traditional syntax. Now let's look at the modern syntax. The first thing you need to do is declare an asynchronous function using the async keyword. So you can't just go and say fetch. You actually have to put it in a function that has been marked as an asynchronous function. And then we'll just call that function when we're ready to do the fetch. So we just have to kind of, do one little extra step here of just putting it in a function. So that's how you use async. And then inside that, you capture the response with the keyword await, and then capture the data with the keyword await again. So both of those promises get handled with await. Await the response, await the data. And you just do that with variables. So it looks a little more straightforward. There's not nearly as much code, and you don't have to write all of those anonymous functions and things. It looks just like this. You use the keywords async and await. Async on the function right before the keyword function, and then await before the fetch and await before the response, unboxing the response with the JSON. So I capture the response object here. Since we're not doing those anonymous functions like we did before, I create a variable called response, and that's how I capture it when it comes back. And just say await the fetch, when it comes back, store it in this. And then I create another variable after fetching this at that endpoint. And the second one, data, is actually going to await the unboxing of the response when we extract the data from that response. So that captures the data. And now that I have the data, I can do stuff with it on the next line. So we don't have to have nested anonymous functions here. We just have single lines of code, one after the other. But these await keywords are what makes it prevents it from moving on. It will not move on to the next one until it receives it back. And then it stays here and it waits, and then it receives it back, and then it will move on. Very straightforward. I really like this newer syntax a lot. And it's absolutely what is used professionally in my experience. So now we're going to do an async await syntax for the second one, where we do cat pics. And in order to do this one, we need to look at the APA documentation again, because it actually is going to require a header. It takes a little bit more work. And that's how this goes. Every API is a little bit different. So the reason we have to have a header is just because of the API key. Now I went ahead and I got one of those. And so I'm going to show you how you add that to your request when you do the fetch. It's actually pretty straightforward. But here looks like the endpoint to get the random image is going to be this one. So I'm just going to copy this first one just to get a single random image. And then I will come in here and get started. Okay, so now we are in the same click listener on the document, and we're saying if event.target.id is cat button, so if it's the cat button that got clicked, then we're going to go ahead and write this async function. So I'll say async function get cat pick. And now I can say let response equal, and I'm just gonna, just to reiterate, this is the basic format no matter what the information is. Await, fetch, like that. And then data would be what I want to call, what's been received. And I'll say await response.json. Okay, that's it. And from there, you can just do what you want to do after this once you receive the data. And then down here, we just have to call get cat pick. We'll do that in a second. Let's go ahead and fill out this fetch. So of course, the first thing we do here is put in that endpoint, right, that we just received. So fetch actually takes additional parameters. One of the next things we can do is, hey, I've got a header for you. So I'm going to put an object in here that has the key headers, and then that value is also going to be an object. So I've got an object within an object, and I'm going to have a key value pair. And it has to be formatted as JSON. So it's going to be in quotes here. X API key. And then I have this very long key that I'm going to paste in here from elsewhere. okay? And that's it. So that's the key and that's the value. It's pushing it to the next line because it's so long, but it's really just the one. And then that's it. I just put an extra object in there after the endpoint, but it's part of the fetch request to begin with. And so once that comes back, it's going to save that in the response. And then here, data will await the response where it's unpackaged as JSON. And now I can work with the data. And just as we did before, of course, we want to just go see what the data is. So I'm going to console log that so that when we click the button, we will just see it in the console, whatever the data is that comes back, and then we can kind of inspect it and see what its keys are and things like that. However, you can see that my function has not yet been called. So this may fire this logic here and say, hey, yeah, you clicked on the cat button, but I have a function definition and nothing more. So I need to actually call it here now that I've defined it and say, make sure that you run this function whenever that button is clicked. All right, let's do it. So we got something back. Let's look at it here. So we actually have an array of objects. It's an array with a single object in it. So that's interesting. It tells us that even though it's returning one object, it's still returning it in an array. And so we have to access it at index 0, and then we'll be able to see the photo will be the URL that's at the URL key of that object. So our reference is going to look a little bit different. Now that we see this, we can see, we can't just go straight to it with, dot message like we did up here because we just got an object. In this case, we're getting an array and the object is within the array. So right here, I will say, okay, we're going to do something similar. In fact, let me just copy this because we're still putting something in the inner HTML of result. The difference is that here, instead of data.message, we need to treat data as an array and go to data at index 0, and then that object will go to .url, since that's the key as we saw before. Let me do it again. Yeah, there's the key URL right there. And there we have it. We've got a cat in a little lion costume. That's super cute. Okay. Aw, Kitty in the snow. We got an animated GIF. That's kind of fun. Okay, we could look at cat pictures all day, right? But now you see this is how this worked. So we needed to do a couple of extra things because we needed the API key. And we got an array, so we had to go down into the array to get to where that URL was. But this is how this works. Every single API is a little bit different. You just follow their rules. You find out how the data is structured, and you just go get what you need from it. And whatever you need, you put on here. So speaking of that, my next slide talks a little bit more about other things you might do. So when you receive the data, you really can do whatever you want with it. You might need some of it. You might need all of it. And for web pages, it often means you're displaying something, right, on the page. So you can certainly access those properties with dot notation like I just showed you. And if you have an array of multiple objects, you can loop through them and do something with every single one of them in the array. So anytime you do something, like say you log into your bank app and you go to look at a list of your recent transactions, that data was very likely received as an array of JSON objects, and then it was looped through and displayed on the page one after the other, just how they wanted it to be displayed with only the information they wanted to pull out of the JSON. So you really can do anything you want. And when you do your studio today, that's exactly what you're going to do. You're going to receive an array and loop through it, and then dynamically display things on the page using the data that's in those JSON objects. If you would like some additional practice on this, I have another little exercise very similar to the one I just did with the cats and dogs that is about quotes, advice, and dad jokes. And so you can explore even more some other APIs out there where they have different rules and different headers that are required. And it'll give you some more practice for navigating what it's like to work with these public APIs, which you'll need to do for your capstone project and liftoff. So it's a good idea to go and investigate some of that now. I have, as previously mentioned, several graded assignment prep tutorials on my website. And these have like actual video, tutorials where I was doing it with students when I was a TA. The first one, Inspired Design, is very easy. It really just uses the things that you would learn about in the very first chapter about the DOM without needing to know about forms or fetching. Pour Me Another is the next one you'd want to do. It actually covers everything. So we're fetching from an API with all these drink recipes. And you have this little form and you can like filter on things and it displays them on these colorful cards. Trivia Time is also built on all those same concepts, but it's a little bit more involved. So if you have time to do all three of them, save that one for last. For your studio today, you will do the chapter 27 studio and fetch data about astronauts and display it on the page. If you have a little extra time, you can have fun with some of the CSS formatting. I did that kind of as a bonus mission for myself. And so if you have time to go look at my studio review for this one, you'll see that I had a whole lot of fun with the extra styling at the end, as I always do. All right, that's it for this lecture. I will see you next time.